It was sort of like being burned at the stake for bucking the church. In the third year of medical school, I came to see that I was being trained to be a pimp for the pharmaceuticals, that I was being trained to maintain disease, give chemicals, do test after endless tests for no good reason. Well, I came to see that we were doing to our patients what we're doing to the planet. We were making them into a toxic waste dump, and it broke my heart to send them out of the clinic or the emergency room with this arthritis and give them a chemical. They said, well, we don't really know what we have. Why don't you read this paperwork from Germany? Well, I can think back to high school where I was more of a follower and I believed in the system. But we got results. We got great results. Nothing was FDA approved. The FDA only approves synthetic petrochemical pharmaceuticals that are patented so that somebody can make $1 bazillion to put through the FDA. I have an obligation to get you well, or to make every attempt to get you well by any means possible. I went to Johns Hopkins University for undergraduate school, and I now can recall that I was being programmed there, but I didn't know it at the time. But while I was at Johns Hopkins, that was the late 1960s, the Vietnam War was in full force. And when I went into college, I believed in the government and its mission, having come out of World War II, a product of parents. And while I was in college, I came to see the abject lies of the government and the pro-war machine. The sort of lies was that we needed to protect the world, that it was our duty to protect the world, that we were attacked when we were not attacked, that we were sending our blood, people my age, into war to be killed, and there was no good reason for it. We were not attacked. I just didn't see any purpose for this. It was not our position to be the defenders of so-called freedom when we were installing our own cronies in foreign lands. I didn't like that. And I protested against the war. We were out on the street outside of the university with placards asking people to try to tear down the war effort with the government. It was very peaceful, what we did. But there was nothing great in my college life at the time that rattled me, except what I thought was the fraud and hoax of the Vietnam War and a war machine. And I was aware of what President Eisenhower had said, beware the military-industrial complex, and I saw it as a machine then. I was not speaking. I just went to rallies against the war, and on the streets of Baltimore, on Charles Street, we just held up signs for the passerbys on Charles Street, protesting what we thought was a vile war that we should not have been in. As a younger child, I had an older brother who was bigger than me, more powerful than me, and we're best friends now. Everything is great, but as a child, he roughhoused me. I was probably the more intelligent of the two, and I had two younger sisters. So I had to make up what I lacked in brawn with whatever I might have had up here. So I got along pretty well with them. I excelled at school, and actually the excelling didn't really come out until I was in high school. Before high school, I was probably pretty average, and in high school, I was way out there.
And why is that?
I don't know. I just became more driven in high school to excel.
And were the other kids ticked off at you that you were excelling?
Not at all. They were not upset at all that I had excelled or done well. I would say in high school, I was one of the intellectuals. I was not a jock, although I played tennis on the tennis team. I was considered one of the intellectuals, and we had tutored other students that were behind, and I had a thirst for knowledge and truth in science. In college, that exploded, actually, and I went to Johns Hopkins University in great fear and trepidation that I would be competing up against students far more intelligent than I. I was really in fear. I can remember to this day my first train trip from Wilmington to Baltimore. And it turned out that I did super, super well, better than most of them. I made what would be the equivalent of Dean's List in my freshman year. I got freshman honors, and I went on and I got Phi Beta Kappa through my 4 years at Johns Hopkins, and this came as a surprise to me because I didn't go there thinking I was that intelligent. I thought I was competing against the cream of the cream, yet I excelled. Until my first year of college, believe it or not, I wanted to be a dentist. And the reason is because I had a friendly dentist who was friends with my parents, and my teeth were good, I didn't get drilled on, and I had a good time at his office. And then most of the students going to Johns Hopkins University were going there to be doctors because of Johns Hopkins Medical School. So I had all these pre-meds. I was pre-dental, so to speak. And what changed my life more than anything was in the summer of '67, I was one of two boys from Delaware. There were two boys from every state who went to the National Youth Science Camp of West Virginia. And I was in the mountains of West Virginia for a month. I saw nature for the first time. It was gorgeous, unlike anything I had ever seen. I was a city boy and I fell in love with nature. And that changed my life. And while I was in college, I decided I wanted to be a country doctor. I didn't want to just hack around in people's mouths. I wanted to trade my services for hens or chickens or produce out in the country. And I just had a love for nature, which continued to this day. And you could see that in the little orchard behind me. Well, I didn't end up actually bartering services, but I did switch and I went to medical school and I became a medical doctor. A little bit different thinking type than others, I guess. And behind me there's 2/3 of an acre that's an orchard that's got well over 100 trees on it of different species, and I am living off the land, which is what I wanted to do after I went to that science camp in West Virginia. He did the same thing. He founded a clinic in the back country. I got along with my professors in medical school very well. The problems that I saw, I kept to myself. Actually, I went to medical school thinking that I'm going to learn how to help people, how to heal people, how to cure people. And by the end of the third year of medical school, I came to realize, remember I talked about college, I began to see the truth of our government in college. In the third year of medical school, I came to see that I was being trained to be a pimp for the pharmaceuticals, that I was being trained to maintain disease, give chemicals, do test after test after endless tests for no good reason. We worked up people to the hilt at UC San Francisco, which was considered one of the best medical schools of the day, and it still is. We worked them up incessantly for high blood pressure. We just gave them pills. We didn't learn a thing about nutrition. We just learned how to give them chemicals. And I came to love the environment at that science camp. I came to love nature, and I saw that we were despoiling the planet at that time. And in medical school, I came to see that we were doing to our patients what we're doing to the planet. We were treating them, we were making them into a toxic waste dump. So the science camp was the big change in my life. It awakened me to the planet, biology, the harmony with nature. And in medical school, I thought I would get that for the human body, and I got nothing but pouring chemicals into them and invading their body. And at the end of my third year, I got depressed, and I am not a particularly depressed person, and I almost quit. I asked myself, what am I doing here? And I figured since I had 3 years already into this, I should finish it out. So I did. And I finished it out, and I promised myself at the end of that third year, I would do everything I could to work with people and not give them synthetic petrochemical pharmaceuticals, to actually help them. And I looked for every way that I could not to give chemicals to people. I think I was unique in my class on that. The professors weren't into this. We were bought and sold by pharma, and I could see that there. I couldn't take this to my professors. I couldn't take my concerns. I knew of no other way. I don't know what would have happened, but I didn't know that there even was another way. I didn't know anything about naturopathy, about homeopathy, about chiropractic. I knew nothing. The only thing I knew was medicine and how to give a pill to somebody to suppress a condition. And that didn't sit well with me. We had antihypertensives, antacids, antibiotics, anti-pain, analgesics. Everything was an anti, and it was just suppressing a symptom, and I saw it then. That's what shook me awake to the causes and needs of the planet. And the science camp isn't what did it, because the science camp was sponsored by industry in the mountains of West Virginia, in the beauty of nature. It was the location in gorgeous, gorgeous, beautiful green country that awakened me to the causes and needs of the planet and actually to ourselves. It wasn't the science camp itself, because it was really industrial science. It wasn't natural science. Now it's different. I think there are a few. But by and large, I went to my 50th class reunion several weeks ago, and UCSF has grown exponentially. Lots of grants, lots of pharma money, lots of industry money for modern technological medicine that's going to make somebody bazillions of dollars. And that was the other thing I didn't like. I mean, we are pushing chemicals on people that were patented and synthetic, and I could see it then. I actually, and I'm really surprised at myself for having the insight to have seen it then. And I believe maybe I was born that way. Maybe it was just something the Creator put into my soul. My parents, no. My parents, my father, I saw where my father actually didn't like the system and at a time or two tried to buck it, but he was complacent with the system. He believed in the government. He was a World War II veteran and believed that we had a great country and a benevolent government. By Vietnam, I saw we did not have a benevolent government, and I changed to his dismay. And then medical school pushed me even further. Now, when I came out of medical school, I didn't know any other way. I only knew how to give people drugs, but I did everything I could not to give them drugs. And I had basically 2 rotating internships. I did a rotating internship across the bay at Highland Hospital in Oakland. And then I went into the Indian Health Service in Gallup, New Mexico. And I did a year as a general medical officer, which is basically another rotating internship. I did all kinds of stuff there. I did C-sections, I pinned bones. I was highly trained when I came out of that year. very, very highly trained from that experience. And then I said I wanted to go into the country and be a family physician, which was unusual for UCSF because they were looking for scientists. But I told them that my interview what I wanted to do, and I was lucky. It was a medical student on the admissions committee who interviewed me, and he liked what I had to say. And I got into UCSF as an out-of-state student. So I went into the Indian Health Service in Gallup, New Mexico, did a year. I got out after a year to do training at the University of Arizona, and I had to go back in and do 2 more years because I took money from the government to go through medical school. At the University of Arizona, I was treated as dirt by those in specialties, even though I was better trained by them, having been in the Indian Health Service, and I didn't like that. But in the family practice residency, we continued to learn pharmaceutical ways, and I was lucky. One of my teachers knew acupuncture, and he was actually doing some acupuncture in my residency, and I said, teach me. So I went and I spent a lot of time with him during my 2nd year of residency. And then the following year, after I got out and went back into the Indian Health Service, which was in Anchorage, Alaska, I took a course on hypnosis. And that was another changing point, because I learned that was a fellow named Siegel. And he was a big-time hypnotist in New York. And he had a method called the hypnotic induction profile, and you could learn who could be hypnotized by his profile. And I had some very interesting experiences with that. I was at the Indian Health Service. I worked the emergency room in the family practice department, and I learned how to sew up people under hypnosis. I didn't even have to give them an anesthetic. And I started using hypnosis to help people quit smoking, ease their pain, and not give them a drug. And at that point was the last time I ever had to use Valium, because I was doing medical hypnosis. I could even age regress people. And I made videos at that time when videotapes came out of age regression. And that was a compelling experience for me. In Anchorage, Alaska, where I was a general medical officer again, and I worked the ER in the family practice clinic, I was hurt when I had Alaska natives come to me with crippling osteoarthritis, and I had to say to them, I am sorry. Modern medicine just hasn't come far enough to know how to treat you. Here, take this Motrin or this Naproxen. That's all I have to give you. And it broke my heart to send them out of the clinic or the emergency room with this arthritis and give them a chemical. It just hurt my crawl. I was actually doing, and then here's another defining thing that happened. I was into acupuncture at the time, and I asked my superiors if I could go to a training class on acupuncture. It was 2 weeks in the Catskill Mountains in New York. And they said, yes, we will give you the time to do that if you will establish a pain clinic here at the hospital. I said, deal. Because in Anchorage, at the Alaska Native Medical Center. I said, good deal, this is a win-win. Well, I went to that 2-week course, and remember, I was a medical doctor, so I thought I was better trained than other people. That's how I was trained to believe. Bill, at that course, there were homeopaths, naturopaths, chiropractors, energy healings, people I never knew existed. I never even knew this existed. And when they talked about asthma, I didn't know homeopathy existed. Chiropractors, yes, they were put down. And I was a medical doctor, and I thought, when the teacher, Ralph Allen Dale, he changed my life. that was another defining moment in my life, those 2 weeks. He said, "What's the cause of asthma?" And I held up my hand and I said, "Well, there's inflammation in the lungs and that causes bronchospasm, viz, viz, viz." And he said, "All right, well, what is the cause of that inflammation?" Oh my God. I just felt I got punched in the face. And I awakened with that. And then I saw a chiropractor doing miracles on people with kinesiology, muscle testing. He did kinesiology on me, which is muscle testing. And I know my body. And my body didn't respond the way it was supposed to respond. And I said, "What is going on?" And I saw him do kinesiology, and he said to me, "You can do this." I said, "I don't think so." But what he said, "You can do this," stuck with me. And when I went back to Anchorage, I attempted to do kinesiology and discovered that I could do it. But he said something else to me. He said, "Anything you can do with this muscle testing, you can alter with your eyes and with your mind." And then I started doing kinesiology and using my thoughts, and I found that this was unbelievable to me, that yes, my thoughts could have an effect on the next human body that I could detect and measure. And it was a stunning discovery for me. And I had to be very careful then when I did kinesiology to keep my mind out of the equation. That was really, really important. I ran with everything that I learned. Remember, I got a rudimentary discussion in acupuncture when I was in training in family practice. And then I ran with that. And I was doing rudimentary acupuncture at the Alaska Native Medical Center, and I wanted to go further. So I had a very in-depth immersion in acupuncture for 2 weeks. And I came back doing a lot of acupuncture, and I got good results. And I couldn't understand why I was getting good results because it was only 2 weeks. And I realized I would have to leave the Native Hospital that year because I was going in a direction that was alternative to those in control. The natives loved it. They loved what I was doing, but the powers, I was going off in another direction that was not conventional. They didn't ask me to leave. I just realized that if I was going to pursue what I knew I had to do, I would have to leave. Oh, I'll tell you what did change. I came back a very different person from that experience. I was married at the time, and my wife was a nurse who had a master's and wanted to go further, and she was extraordinarily conventional. And I came back almost like I was spiritually awakened from that 2 weeks. Literally, it was a total spiritual experience to me, and I couldn't describe to anyone what had happened to me. It was like I saw a totally different concept of the universe. I came back different. I was a shock. I was a different human being when I came back, just totally awakened to a different universe. To my then wife, I became like a quack chiropractor. And I knew I had to go into alternative medicine at the time. She didn't want that. And it caused a lot of friction between us. And it ended up being probably the cause of us splitting up. I wanted somebody who would support me. She was opposed, and I'm not saying this to demean her, not at all. We went into counseling, and we ended up from being the cup empty to the cup being half empty to the cup being half full, but I wanted somebody to be with somebody who would actually support what I was doing and had to do and not just tolerate it. So it wasn't going to change. I didn't want to change her, and I didn't want to be changed. I just knew what I had to do because I was cracked open and I could not continue in conventional medicine. So I left the hospital at the end of that year and went into acupuncture. Billy, you're asking me how this happened, and all I can say is I must have been made that way. I never liked somebody telling me what to do. I liked finding truth and doing the right thing. I, at one time, was a follower in high school, and I guess somehow the sequence of things turned me into what you might call a leader, if you want to call me that. I wasn't leading anybody at this time.
Yeah.
This was all me. This was following a path, following a path of truth. I wanted to live in nature. And that led me to a skewed view of medical school, what I was seeing in medical school. And then I went after medical school to do everything I could not to be party to that. I didn't want to be party to the destruction of my patient. I wanted to be party to the healing of my patient because I saw my patient like I saw the world. We were destroying the world. And my God, everything I predicted back then is coming to pass. Plastics, chemicals. I predicted the impact of chemicals on what it was going to happen to us. And we can see the impact of those chemicals on our sexuality and gender identity. Somehow, I don't know. I just think I was divinely inspired at that camp and at that acupuncture class, the 2 weeks in the mountains. Everything's internal at this point. Yes. All right, so you're talking about dragging other people. All right. The year was 1982 when I went to that acupuncture class. That changed me spiritually, mentally, physically. Everything changed, especially spiritually. Bill, I came back from that class, I had felt things metaphysically that I can't explain to you. In the emergency room, at the hospital, at the native hospital, I had a woman come to me who broke her toe. And I just felt so filled with love and light after that acupuncture class. And when this woman came to me, I knew there was nothing I could do. It was a toe fracture. And you're not going to splint it. You're not going to put a cast on it. Yeah, you might put a little splint on it. But it was black and blue and it hurt. So I decided to do something energetically. And I took my thumb and forefinger like this on that toe and my thumb and forefinger like this on the opposite foot. And I became an energy channel. And I just channeled energy from the universe into her. And I had
no idea what you were doing.
Not really. And I called a nurse in that I was friends with, the emergency room nurse. I said, I want you to come in and see this because something's happening here. So I did this for about 3 minutes and I could feel energy in my body. And the woman left with no pain in her toe and the black and blue had largely cleared. And this was witnessed by the nurse. So I knew there was something. I mean, here I experienced it myself, not long after this class. And that I redoubled what I knew I had to do. And I knew that my marriage wasn't going to last. It just made it much easier. That was one energy experience. I did other things in the emergency room because I didn't want to give drugs. People would come into the emergency room with headaches. And I put my hands on them, on the acupuncture points. And instead of sticking needles into them, I just allowed myself to be a conduit for energy, and they left with no pain. And I just came to realize there's something a heck of a lot more going on than we know. And one thing led to the other. So I left the hospital, started an acupuncture clinic, and it took a lot of cojones to do that because I was recently separated, onto divorce, had 3 small children, had to support them, starting a practice after leaving not the best paying job, but a good paying job, secure, working for the Indian Health Service. I was a commissioned officer. And I just had a lot of faith that I was doing the right thing. So I started acupuncture. By 1985, I had discovered that there was something called chelation therapy, where people were getting chelated to reverse their vascular disease. And I went to a meeting, and this was my introduction to nutrition with all the vendors. I couldn't believe what was out there. And I brought back all kinds of information from the vendors, and I just read for months, hours and hours on end. I was going to a spiritual center in Anchorage called the Adams Center, Ancient Teachings of Masters, for meditation and for healing, for the trauma that I had recently gone through with a divorce and my kids being taken. And I met a nurse there who was in those classes as well. And we became friends, more than friends. She was not happy where she was working. She decided that she thought she would like working with me, and she was doing chelation therapy. So she encouraged me to go to this meeting, which I did, and that cracked me open in yet another new field. At that time, I was only doing acupuncture. So now I learned about chelation therapy, I learned about nutrition, I brought home months and months of reading material, and I just swallowed as much as I could. We didn't have the internet at the time, so it was all paperwork. She came to work for me. We started a clinic together. Her name was Pat, and we're still good friends to this day. We worked together. We started our own healing center. She was the nurse, I was the doctor. We did chelation therapy. And at the meeting I went to, Bill, this was 1986, there was an exhibitor who had an ozone machine. Now, at that time, we were trained to think of antioxidants. We were all scared of oxidants. Free radical damage, oxidants. I said, ozone, that's a powerful oxidant. What are you doing with this? Well, they didn't know what they had. This was a colon cleansing company who happened to have a machine from Germany that somehow got into the country under the radar. They said, well, we don't really know what we have. Why don't you read this paperwork from Germany? So I took it up to my room that night, and I'm not a morning person. I stayed up till 2 or 3 a.m. I couldn't put the paperwork down. And I got up at 7:30 to get to that exhibit hall a half an hour before it opened to be first in line to get the machine. That was an ozone machine. Biomedica was the company. And I took it back to Alaska, and I tried to get some bottles, and the FDA then intervened because I couldn't get bottles because they were coming from Germany. What do you mean I can't get bottles? Bottles! Well, somehow I managed to get some bottles. I started doing ozone in 1986 with that nurse, Pat, and miracles occurred unbelievable to all of us. We saw people getting better from diseases we had no clue what they were. We just knew chronic fatigue syndrome. That's what we called it. Better known as Lyme disease today, or chronic infection. Bill, almost 100% of people were getting better. It was just stunning. And at that time I was doing gravity ozone. That machine was capable of doing hyperbaric ozone, but I screwed up with the first hyperbaric on the nurse, and we weren't aware we had to use heparin, Her blood clotted, and the line exploded. We got blood everywhere, and we realized we had to use heparin, and I didn't have the nerve to do hyperbaric again until I got a Zotzman machine in 1991, and I got better training in Germany. So we did gravity ozone. We did forbidden things. We actually put vitamin C right into the blood after it had been ozonated and got even better results. We did a lot of stuff. We got almost everybody better. In 1987, Pat and I went to Germany, and we had lectures in German, which I could understand some German. I had German in high school and college. And we went to see Horst Kief. He may or may not sound familiar to you. He was one of the German pioneers in ozone who actually developed the hyperbaric ozone technique. And so I got some rudimentary in 1987, 1986 or 7, with Pat. And everything else was me, just doing my own thing, even shooting joints. And the funny thing was, I didn't know if there would be interaction between procaine and ozone. So I was shooting ozone into joints without procaine, scared, and it hurt people. And I didn't like hurting them, but we got results. We got great results. One of my first cases was a guy with a big knee, swollen, and it was a Lyme joint, and he was told it was a Lyme joint. We shot ozone into it once, and it was fixed. I didn't even use a local anesthetic. So I shot backs, I shot joints, and it wasn't until the early 2000s when I discovered everybody else was using local anesthetics that we started using local anesthetics. Poor people that I had done beforehand. Well, that expanded it even better because now we could do a lot more ozone without a lot of discomfort. I read Wiebon's book, so that was some basic protocols. I knew what the Germans were doing. We were giving ozone at 45 micrograms generally, and we were using less to put into joints. But remember, we also didn't know what we were giving, and I didn't know that until a few years ago when we started getting analyzers. We just guessed at what we were doing. So I really expanded what we were doing in 1991 when I started doing hyperbaric ozone with the Zotzman machine. I met him. I went to Germany, and we got even better results after doing hyperbaric ozone. I started doing ultraviolet blood irradiation therapy in 1989. That added, saw wonderful results with that. And I was deeply involved in nutrition, cleaning up diet. So in the 1990s, I really became what we would call an integrative physician, functional medicine, complementary, and I called it biological medicine. Cleaning up diet, detoxing, chelating, ozone, trying to do everything possible to help that body heal. Nothing was FDA approved. The FDA only approves synthetic petrochemical pharmaceuticals that are patented so that somebody can make $1 bazillion to put through the FDA. The FDA is not part of the equation. I call them the Fraud and Deception Administration. They don't govern nutrition. They govern chemicals, something synthetic, because you can't patent something natural. Bill, I told you I sought truth. And I considered myself a moral person. You pay me, I have a duty, I have an obligation to get you well, or to make every attempt to get you well by any means possible, any way possible. That was the bottom line for me. You came to me, I was your servant, paid servant. So to hell with the FDA, to hell with drugs, to hell with the system. My duty was to you. My first duty was to God. You were a representative of God. And therefore, I served God by serving you. Does that make any sense? You don't get away with that easily in today's world because we're not motivated. When I say we, the system is not motivated by higher purposes. The system is motivated and controlled by what makes money. What makes money? Even the churches are controlled by money. It's not controlled by spirit or spirituality, but by money. And yes, I had to make a living. And yes, I charge patients. But we always were as fair as we possibly could be. In fact, even today, Terry and I charge less for a lot of our procedures than our students, the people we taught. And that's fine. We want to charge fairly and make a fair and honest living. And incidentally, there was a spiritual change, another spiritual change in my life. I met Terry at a meeting in 2000. And I sat down next to her accidentally at a medical meeting. And I knew almost immediately that this was going to be my wife. She was on a spiritual path that was not what I would call religious. It was spiritual. We made certain vows. The vows were being vegetarian, living a clean and moral life, no mind-altering substances, meditating. Living a clean and moral life involved not begging, charging fairly for your services, making a clean living, keeping sex into a marriage. These things were all very spiritual, very easy to do. It didn't involve dogma. The hardest thing to do was the long periods of meditation to turn in, to find God within. And that was another change in my life. So we established a clinic together and to serve people and to do the right thing. And we bucked the system. In Alaska, you need to know this. I saw in the late 1980s, doctor after doctor losing their licenses in other states and not hurting anybody. They were doing alternative medicine, not doing the party line. It was sort of like being burned at the stake for bucking the church. And I thought, you know, I was becoming very popular in Alaska. That's where I became a leader, I guess. My patients loved me. The community loved me. The doctors hated me because I was bucking conventional medicine. I stood out. I was actually on the radio. I had my own radio show and was very popular in the community, bucking the system. And the doctors thought I turned into a quack. In fact, one guy, I was an emergency room doctor for the Indian Health Service and very well respected. One guy said to me, "Why did you give up that to go into chelation, quackery?" Well, we know chelation today is not quackery. I said, because I had to do the right thing. Well, by 1990, one of my patients was a state senator. And I said, would you help me get a bill passed in Alaska protecting alternative medicine? He said, sure. His name was Pat Rohde. And he introduced the bill at the end of that session, but it got nowhere. It was too late. And the next season, we went at it. And I had two representatives who agreed to help me. And Rohde was in the Senate. So my bill was introduced in the House, and I had to go through hoops to get it passed. It was stripped in the Finance Committee by the medical mob. It had nothing to do with medicine. They wanted it out because the bill said, the board shall not base a finding of professional incompetence solely on the basis that a licensee's practice is unconventional. That's all it said. That's all it had to say. But they stripped it out because the medical mob didn't want this. They were controlled. And then they decided to disgrace me, and they brought up a quackbuster, John Renner, from the lower 48. I was invited to speak at the Anchorage Medical Society. And members objected, saying, "You're having that quack speak, get rid of him. Why don't you have the quackbuster come?" So without telling me, they canceled my appearance without even talking to me. This woman's name was Jennifer Christensen, and she became an enemy of alternative medicine, a pro-fluoride person in water, canceled me, and then rescheduled it with John Renner, a quackbuster. And she scheduled it as a joint meeting of the Anchorage Medical Society and Dental Society, first ever joint meeting of the two organizations. And she set it up she wanted to disgrace me as a debate where I would be facing this quackbuster. Now, this was at the time when we wanted to get this bill passed. This made the news, and the public was incensed that they were excluded from it, and I was going to face this notorious quackbuster. Everybody came, all the doctors and dentists came. They all came to see me destroyed. And they expected to see me destroyed. I decided, since the dentists were going to be there, that I would give a scientific presentation on mercury poisoning. Oh boy. And I got the information from a guy named Sybil Rude. You might be familiar with him because you're a dentist. And Renner went first. That was the condition. I said, I'll do this. Jennifer Christian, I think. She had him sit right next to her side, and I sat at the end of the table. That's where she put me. Very, very biased. He went first, and he talked about quackery. He talked about women going up and pressing their boobs up against necks as a boob massage to help people feel better. And then massage therapy, crystal healers, and in the same breath he talked about chelation in the next breath, associating chelation, guilt by association. That was his presentation. There is quackery, but there's another form of quackery called quality care with kindness. So then it was my turn to speak. We had equal time. I gave a scientific presentation on mercury, its release, and its toxicity. I got calls from people who did not like me, respect me, or anything before then. And they contacted me the next day and said, that guy, Renner, was an idiot, a jerk, and you gave quite a presentation. You showed us who you were. Renner left that debate with his tail between his legs, and the only thing he could do afterwards was send information back to the society attacking Sybil Rude. So if you can't attack the presentation and the information, you attack the messenger. That's all he could do. Now, what came of that was the public was incensed. I got on the radio, and I got the public enraged that my bill was stripped by the Finance Committee. And I went on the radio 3 days in a row telling the community what happened. And I got another representative to agree to put it back in, provided I made some compromises. She wanted to ensure that patients would be safe from what I was doing. Oh, it didn't matter that those guys were giving chemicals and drugs and killing people. They were concerned about me. So she said, would you agree to this? And what I had to agree to was to agree that I wouldn't hurt anybody. So they said, in the absence of demonstrable harm to a patient. I said, yes, I'll agree to that, but add one word. In the absence of demonstrable physical harm to a patient, because I didn't want to be accused of financial harm from being a quack. She agreed. So that was how we got the wording back in, and they added another word for me. The board shall not base a finding of professional incompetence solely on the basis that a licensee practice is unconventional or experimental. I got that word in the absence of demonstrable physical harm to a patient. That narrowly passed the House because we got more public opinion messages into the House than any issue since the Vietnam War. That was 1991. There was demonstrable harm coming from their side, but they didn't care about that. They cared about me. So it passed, and then my patient, Senator Rowen, got it through the Senate untouched. And it was attached to a bill that the governor wanted so that they couldn't strip it out. And the governor signed it, and that was the first bill in North American history protecting alternative medicine. And it was reproduced in several other states. 2 years later, I was appointed by Governor Hickel to the state medical board. Again, against overwhelming medical mob participation. They lobbied hard and hard. I was still on the radio, and they did everything they could to defeat my confirmation in the legislature, and I was confirmed. Now, get this. They couldn't defeat me that way, so the medical mob got together with the dental mob, and at the meeting of the Alaska State Medical Association, they voted that chelation therapy for anything but the removal of toxic metals was quackery, and they voted that mercury amalgam, to remove mercury amalgam from the teeth, was quackery and unethical. They thought they could get me that way because I had a very busy practice with 3 biological dentists in the 90s recommending to people to get their amalgams out when I discovered it was poisoning them. We treated thousands of people, Bill, literally thousands. I had more experience with this than anybody alive. They voted this, but it went nowhere. So that's the political story. I moved down here in 2001 after I married Terry. And we started doing ozone therapy very rapidly after that, and things just exponentially grew with that, with her. She picked it up very quickly. We started teaching. In fact, I was teaching ozone even before I left Alaska. We had an organization called the IOMA, International Oxidation Medicine Association. And I became an officer in that, but eventually it folded into ACAM. ACAM is American College for Advancement in Medicine. And I became a teacher of ozone and oxidation for them until they pulled a fast one on me around 2017, and then I just quit. And since 2000s, I started with a woman named Skoshi Farr, who was the widow of Charles Farr. He was the father of modern hydrogen peroxide. And we taught oxidation classes together, and she passed away, and I continued on my own teaching ozone with Terry in our office. And we still do that when we can, and we have a few classes each year generally. We've had all kinds of experience doing oxidation therapies. Terry calls it the closest thing we have to a universal panacea. And it is not a universal panacea, it's the closest thing we have to a universal panacea. I've also noticed, as the years have gone by, remember I told you in the beginning, 95 to 100% of people got better with ozone alone. Much less now. I would say it's more like 85%. 80 to 85%. You're going to ask me why. And that's because the environment is more intoxicated, the diet has gotten worse, there's more stress, etc., etc. There's more interference fields from surgery, from non-biological dentistry, and you have to go after all of these if you're going to get your patients well. In other words, you could come to me for me to shoot ozone into you, and if you have a dental disturbance, I don't want to do anything until you get your dental disturbance taken care of. An interference field is coined by the Germans who did neural therapy. It is an energetic disturbance in the body that disrupts the harmony of the autonomic nervous system. So it's called an interference. My analogy is the old pinball machine that went on tilt. You shook it too much and it goes on tilt. It's still lit up, but it's non-functional. So this disturbance, it could be a scar on the body, it could be a root canal, a dead tooth. The body doesn't like dead teeth. It could be a cavitation in the jaw, which is a subclinical infection. You might not know it's there. It could be an old injury. It could be an insult, a psychological insult. It could be a rape, actually, that upset the nervous system where memories are stored in the nerves. And it disrupts the harmony of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And that can be treated, and it must be treated before you do other things to get the body back in balance. If it's a dental issue, they have to go to a dentist to get that fixed. I can diagnose it, and I think I'm pretty good. Here's my ego talking. I think I'm pretty good at it. If I use muscle testing, and somehow God gave me a gift. I resonate with teeth and energy disturbances in the mouth. I can also do the same with scars. So we detect scars with kinesiology, and if it's positive, we inject the scar. A woman who was abused, we may have to inject the pelvis, and then miracles happen for the woman. For a dental issue, all we can do is diagnose it. We shoot some procaine into what we call the odontin point, the gum underneath the tooth, and somebody might walk into the office like this, and then you inject it, and they dance out of the office, and you wonder, what the heck happened? Now, I don't expect anybody to believe me. I expect you to believe the patient, so I started videoing this because it's unbelievable. No one would believe me. So I video these people, and they are crippled walking in, and I do a test dose. Pain goes away. I say, I don't want to do anything else with you. You got to go see the dentist before we do anything else with you. And so that's an interference field, and that has to be treated. And that's one reason why I think our results are really quite good, better than average, is because we're addressing these things before we get into really expensive therapy. Very few people today call me a quack because of the results. Our colleagues, none of them. Well, none of them. But in general, things have changed in medicine. Even the conventional medicine doctors are not so discouraging, at least here, of their patients getting some alternatives. But there are many who are. There are many who are well steeped. The cancer doctors, some internal medicine doctors, but they're becoming more open-minded because they are seeing that they have many, many failures, and their failures are growing. So I'm being called a quack much, much less. And that YouTube channel, we've had well over 1 million views. Now there's plenty of YouTube videos of me, but it's my channel if you're interested in this, because the channel is not about me. The channel is about the methods and the patients. Bill, you asked me about Ebola, and you know, I had been working with ozone since 1986, as long as anybody in North America. And I knew pretty well what ozone could do. And when Ebola broke out, I said to myself, this is an opportunity to possibly put ozone on the world map. And I wanted to go. Ebola is a virus, a filovirus, that's spread by contact. It's not spread by aerosol unless it gets weaponized, and I'm sure they're working on that. It's a lethal disease, the most lethal infectious disease known on the planet. And in this particular epidemic, the death rate was 60%. In other words, if you got Ebola, you had a 60% chance of death. It's not a pleasant death either. It comes out of nowhere. No one really knows a lot about the reservoir. So I wanted to go, and serendipitously, I got a message from a guy named Jeff McNamara who was looking for an ozone doctor to go to Sierra Leone because he had a friend over there, a physician, who wanted to learn how to do it.
Hmm.
And I said, better than that, I'll go. I don't want to just teach him virtually. It's serendipitous what happened. He put me in touch with this fellow, and this fellow knew the president. And I wanted somebody to come with me. So I asked Howard Robbins to come with me. And when I called him up to say, Howard Robbins is a doctor in New York who is well known for his work with DIV ozone, direct intravenous gas. And that's controversial in the ozone world. I understand how some people feel about it, but I think it's unwarranted because, from what I can tell, it's the most widely used form of ozone in the world because it's dirt cheap. It's quite safe if it's done correctly, and it's very, very effective. Not as effective as the way I do it, which is, say, 10 pass or hyperbaric ozone therapy. It doesn't work as fast, but it's as effective, at least in my experience, and Howard. So I called him up. I said, hey, Howard, I want to go to Sierra Leone. And he basically used the F word. He said, F you, are you out of your mind? No way, Rowen, no way. I said, fine, Howard. Um, I'm going to go anyway, and I'm going to use your method. And we hung up, and I looked at my watch and started counting. And exactly 20 seconds later, he called me back and he said, Rowen, if you think you're going to go to Sierra Leone alone and get all the credit for this using my method, screw you. I'm coming too. So that's how that happened. And then we had a lot of really nice, supportive physicians, you among them. And we got over $20,000 worth of donations for this. Every airline had quit going except Royal Air Maroc, but we managed to get on them and get a promise from them that they would put the equipment on as freight on the same flight we were on. But considering the emergency, they went out of their way to help us. We also got a personal invitation from the president of Sierra Leone because I didn't want to do that without that kind of invitation. We met with the president and twice on two occasions. And Howard did a treatment on him, DIV, which was amazing that he was able to do that. And the president cleared us then to work with his underlings to go to work with Ebola. So we went out there with the idea to train. And we went through one level after the other, but interestingly, the level that was missing was the Minister of Health, who was not there at the time we arrived. And this bears out later. So we went from the president to several other dignitaries, and then finally we went to their Ebola czar, Paulo Conte, who was a military man, and he was in charge of all their Ebola operations. And he said, what are you waiting for? Get out there. So he arranged for us or me to go to their center called Hastings, which was maybe 30 miles outside of Freetown. It was a police academy that they converted to a treatment center. Howard was leaving. He didn't go. I did. So I went to the Ebola treatment center, and the goal was to train them. Now, we had a good start because the very first day we got there, or the next day, we got to talk before 100 health professionals, including one of their most prestigious doctors. I think her name was Roberts. And she ended up getting an ozone treatment, and it did a nice number on her knee. And she was blown away by it. She was head of one of their societies. So um, we did a couple other doctors at the local hospital called Blue Shield, and they were blown away by the prolozone treatment into their joints. They couldn't believe what happened to them. So I went out to the treatment center alone. Howard had to go back. And while I'm out training the doctors, a call comes in from the assistant minister of health to the head of the center. If you value your job, there will be no ozone. And I felt like I got kicked in the you know what, literally, right in the nuts. And I have a pretty cool temper. I don't get angry very easily. It's very difficult to make me angry. But if I do get angry, I can blow, and I blew. And I lost it. I said, people in this room are going to die. And they heard me. The the order didn't prohibit me from continuing the training. We continued the training. The doctors and all the nurses lined up. They wanted it. But I was scared for them. So we did get done the training, and they knew what to do. And I left that night. And then the next day, I went on their national television for the second time. Only this time it was me versus three or four government dignitaries condemning what we were doing. One of them had the nerve to say, why don't you go back to your own country and experiment on your own people with this? That was about as racist as you could get. I risked my life to go to Sierra Leone at my expense. I paid my travel. The contributions did not pay for the travel. Howard and I paid. We went at our own expense, our own risk, and this is what I get. Well, this guy was part of the Ebola task force, and I said, I came here to save lives. You're burning bodies and burying them. Turns out that guy, his name was Gouger, I think Sam Gouger or something like that. A year and a half later, he was prosecuted for embezzling $1.5 million that was coming in to get rid of the bodies he was supposed to burn. Interesting. I believe he went to prison. I'm not sure. In any event, I did leave, and I was terrified leaving because I knew in my heart something demonic had happened. And as I was sitting at their airport, I was worried. I said, am I going to get out of here in one piece? Well, obviously I did. We found out a year and a half later from Julian Holmes. You remember Julian, yes?
Oh.
A dentist in South Africa, well connected, that pharma went to the World Health Organization and told them that they were going to pull out of Africa if they didn't scuttle the ozone project because they knew about it. That's how it happened. So WHO went to the Minister of Health and got them to scuttle the project and allow people to die, telling them that they were going to pull out. Now, so here's what happened after we left. 3 weeks after I left, one of the doctors that I trained and happened to photograph in the training, we were called that he had stuck himself with a contaminated needle, and within 48 hours, he had developed a fever. 60% chance of dying. If he had told them, his superiors, about this, he'd have been thrown in the tank. 60% chance of death. I think the best they get is water and some comfort. we had left a lot of vitamins. We left vitamin C and some other things that were part of the process. And we told him to treat himself DIV, I think 3, 4 times a day. He was out
So you
of
can do everything. Just put your gas directly into the vein.
directly into the vein, gas into the vein, about 20 cc's of gas moving up to 40, directly into the vein. He did not deteriorate after he first started getting ozone, and in about 48 hours, he was all better. It was amazing. Everything changed after that.
Huh.
Then we had a couple others get it, lower level medical people. They got treated and they recovered very quickly. Now, again, all of this was on the QT. The higher ups weren't told about it. One doctor, their chief doctor, the chief doctor of the country, a surgeon, stuck himself with a needle during a surgery. He got Ebola. Our team went to him, and he was English trained in Western medicine. And he said, nope, he was going to wait for ZMapp from Switzerland. And ZMapp was flown in for him.
That was a vaccine?
I think it was an antibody, I believe. And while it was thawing out, he died. Well, his female consort, who had begged him to do ozone, he wouldn't do it. She's placed under armed military guard at her house because she's extraordinarily high risk. No one could go in. Our team could not go in. She could not leave. So she climbs over a razor wire fence in her backyard to escape and get to our people. When I wrote the article, I did not know that she was symptomatic. I didn't find out until a year later. She was symptomatic. In the article, I said she wasn't. I said she was a high-risk exposure. She was symptomatic. She got ozone, recovered instantly. It took me 3 years to get, or maybe 2, I got a handwritten letter message to me from Sierra Leone thanking God for ozone. And in the letter, she says, I lost half my life, meaning her consort who died, but I was spared, and I thank God for ozone. And that's the story. Well, we had 5 people that we got to. Oh, there was one other one, a doctor. He was there when I was training. He was a captain in the military. He decided to take the ozone because he was already symptomatic. He recovered. He was ridiculed by his friends afterwards, saying, oh, you couldn't have had Ebola because you'd have been dead.
Yeah.
Ridicule. He was symptomatic. And then there was one other one. Remember, I yelled and screamed and I said, someone's going to die. One of the doctors we trained got Ebola, begged for ozone. He told them, he made the mistake of telling them. He was refused ozone and shipped by a paddy wagon to a hospital where he was in kidney failure and died. And that breaks my heart. That is the Sierra Leone story. I submitted it to British Medical Journal, and they said, we don't think it will be of interest to our readers. So I put it in the African Journal of Infectious Diseases. A couple months later, British Medical Journal published an article on an Ebola vaccine. We cured the damn disease. And that's not of interest to the readers. And they publish about a vaccine which has no relevance in Great Britain. That's what happened. The question is, what can we do to generate more of me? I never considered myself anything special, and I don't. I just became a truth seeker. And I try to inspire others to this end simply by speaking truth. Not about me, but about truth. In other words, what's the body about? The body's a biological machine and a spiritual machine combined into one. So we have to give the body, let's talk about logic. And when I teach, I preach logic, trying to inspire others to this similar logic, which to me is truth. It might not be truth to someone else, because to the average conventional doctor, his illness is a deficiency of synthetic petrochemical pharmaceuticals that he has a genetic need for. Now, I think God made me with a need for what you see around here, what you just saw in our orchard. If God didn't make it, don't eat it. That's the first order of business. So I'm looking for truth in that. So when I try to bring this to other people, I bring those truths, and it's either going to awaken them or it's not going to awaken them. I think the patients, we're going to get more awakening amongst the population first, because they're getting sicker and sicker, remaining ill with bodies that cannot heal. And I wrote exactly that in my journalism 40 years ago. Those words about insurance. We're going to pay more and get less because our bodies cannot heal. So to educate, you have to bring truth and encourage people to search for truth and how to get the body to heal. It's not going to be easy. We're fighting a battle, forgive me, a spiritual battle, I believe, of light and dark. I have people close to me in medicine, and I'm saying close to me. I'm not talking about my colleagues. I'm talking about other people that I'm close to who are trained by the system and believe in the system. They believe in vaccines. They believe in fluoride. They believe in evidence-based medicine because that's what they're being trained to believe. And they, for whatever reason, they don't have the capacity to think outside the box. And I don't have an answer for that. I don't have a good answer for it. The medical schools are run by pharmaceuticals, and they have done an outstanding job at brainwashing. Just as religions have done an outstanding job at brainwashing followers to think that their religion is the truth, the light, and the way. I'm not hitting on any religion. Please understand that. It's just that we're being programmed. Schools are programming us. Parties, political parties are programming us. The medical mob is programming us. The New World Order is programming us. The deep state, the press is programming us. You're asking me, what can we do? And my own belief is if we don't awaken soon, we're headed for disaster. For example, Bill, you may or may not know this about me. I wrote a book called They Own It All, Including You by Means of Toxic Currency. It's about, I don't have my wallet on me. I would show you a gold coin versus a dollar bill. The currency system is a fraud. It's based on a lie and a fraud. And when I discovered the truth of that, I was compelled to write a book about it. And ultimately, they came after me for that. That was the real reason why they came after me. So when you're looking for truth, if you buck the system, you can get taken out. And you can just look at what has happened with Trump. He survived, but he was looking for truth. This is not a political statement. I'm not saying I'm a Trumpy or I'm not a Trumpy. But a lot of the stuff he was saying was absolutely true, and we know that. So what do we do? I don't know. Look what happened with Kennedy. Kennedy has been speaking truth, and they did everything possible to stop him from his confirmation, just like they did with me, trying to stop me from my confirmation as on the medical board. Bill, I don't have an answer for this. I think, I don't know how to get into medical school. In fact, at UC San Francisco, I met somebody who's on the faculty, and I said, I will offer to speak and come and talk to your students. You don't have to pay me, I'll come. Just introduce them to what I do. Nothing has come of it at this point, but I'm willing. They have to be open to it. I am optimistic that Kennedy is going to bring forth the truth of vaccination because it's right in front of us. And I've listened to him, and I've listened to others who have access to him, and it's right there. And I think vaccines have done more harm than good. I think they've done good. And I think if you want a vaccine, get informed consent and go and get it. Just don't impose it on me or my children. Yes, I think we will get somewhere with that. I think we will get somewhere with fluoride being dumped into the water supply. We will get somewhere with all the synthetic dyes and chemicals. Are we going to get really far? It's going to be tough because we have a chemical-based economy, and they have every vested interest in keeping the pesticides and chemicals still rolling. Which chemicals? It's a Ponzi scheme. More chemicals, more disease, more drugs. More drugs, more side effects, more drugs, and it continues. And it's the greatest diabolical, evil scheme I could ever have imagined. Yes, the public is awakening to it slowly, but those in power are run by the demons. Do I have hope? I try to I have faith in a creator, absolute faith, because I know that what I do is beyond me. Kinesiology is beyond me. It is coming from a force that connects us all, so I have deep faith. And all I can say is I am hopeful that there can something be done or will be done before an unmitigated calamity happens, a calamity of what we would call biblical proportions. And I sense it's coming. I don't think it has to happen, but I don't think we will awaken in time. So when you're looking for truth, if you buck the system, you can get taken out.